There's always been a very powerful conservative strand in American history. But after World War II, conservatism has emerged as an extremely influential social and political aspect of American life. How did that happen? Well, in some respects, conservatism after World War II grew out of an increasing frustration with the impact of the New Deal on American life and the array of federal programs that continued into the 1950s, 60s, and ever since, including Social Security. Another aspect of conservatism was, of course, spawned by the Cold War. Many conservatives in the 1940s and 50s were especially aroused by the war against communism, and anti-communism was a very explicit aspect of the conservative agenda. At the same time, conservatism in American history has always included what we might call social conservatives, people animated by a very powerful religious belief and moral ideals who have become increasingly concerned about the growing permissiveness of American society and the growing secularism of American society. So conservatism has represented a wide spectrum of motives and ideas and objectives. And that's certainly true today. Modern American conservatism, in some respects, emerged with the candidacy of Barry Goldwater for the presidency in 1964, running against Lyndon Johnson. Goldwater very explicitly characterized himself as a conservative candidate running against New Deal liberalism in the form of Lyndon Johnson. He said he wanted to offer the American people a choice, not simply an echo. Of course, Goldwater was soundly defeated by Johnson, but the conservative movement was not defeated in 1964. In fact, it has continued to grow. In some respects, conservatism fed upon the backlash in Middle America among what Nixon called the silent majority against the social turmoil of the 1960s and the growing government activism of the 1960s, especially during the administration of Lyndon Johnson. President Nixon's electoral victory in 1968 in many respects symbolized the growing power of the conservative movement and the backlash against the social activism and the anti-war movement of the 1960s. In the 1970s, a decade that experienced unprecedented inflation, grassroots conservatives began to emerge focused explicitly on the increasing property taxes resulting from inflationary rises in property values. That is, as the values of their homes increased, so too did the amount of property taxes that they had to pay. In California, that led to a grassroots rebellion against high property taxes that forced the state government to begin cutting back on its expenses in order to enable reductions in property taxes. So that anti-tax revolt became a very important strand in conservatism during the 1970s. And finally, in the 1980s, conservatives capitalized on the growing American fear of increasing deficit spending by the federal government, concerned about the need to balance America's budgets rather than continue to go into debt. In the 1970s, another aspect of the conservative movement was a backlash against the feminist movement. A woman named Phyllis Schlafly very effectively organized efforts across the country to oppose the Equal Rights Amendment that ultimately failed to gain ratification from enough states to become an amendment to the Constitution. So the backlash against many of the libertarian movements of the 1960s was a very powerful aspect of the conservative revolt. It was also manifested in the organization called the Moral Majority, founded by Jerry Falwell, a very prominent televangelist from Virginia. He was able to recruit a significant array of American Christians upset about the direction of American society in the 1970s and 80s and form a very powerful political coalition, electing candidates that they deemed were sufficiently conservative. Jerry Falwell and the Moral Majority eagerly engaged in what they came to call the culture wars, whereby they believed that family values were being assaulted by all of the various forces growing out of the 1960s and its turmoil, whether it be feminism, whether it be abortion, whether it be growing secularism, whether it be gay rights, all of that they considered to be a direct assault on family values. And the culture war involved a strenuous debate throughout the 1970s about whose family values are we defending, whose values are at risk here. The culture wars have continued to provide a significant motive for Americans to become more and more active at the grassroots level in the conservative movement. And it was that conservative movement in all of its varieties that Ronald Reagan was able to capitalize on in 1980 in developing such an effective campaign strategy against Jimmy Carter and the Democrats.